Welcome to Let's Talk, where Spokane Talks hosts seek out and discuss the latest on a variety of interesting topics to Spokane and North Idaho. Here's today's host, Mike Fitzsimmons.
Welcome to this edition of Let's Talk. I'm Mike Fitzsimmons, and with me is Patrick Johnson, who seeks the position of District Court Judge in Spokane County, position number 1. Patrick, thanks you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Whenever we see the judgeships on the ballot, right? Everybody goes, well, how do I know what to think about this guy or that guy? It's all a mystery to me, right? And sometimes there's only one person to choose in any event. You have a contest going in this particular case, but the point is that the voters really wonder sometimes, what am I to do? What's the criteria I should apply? How do I know whether this person would make a good judge?
Yeah.
What about you? What do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. It is a tough position for the public to really know what's going on, and I've met people all over the county at these various events throughout the summer, and I've talked to a lot of smart people, a lot of people who are engaged in their community and want to know, and they want to vote, but they don't know who to vote for. They don't know how they should even figure that out. In fact, looking at the primary results, I was amazed. There were 20,000 people who voted on other issues on their ballot, but simply did not make a choice for District Court Judge. So I get it, it's a tough position, because partly folks don't know what District Court does. In fact, I was a bit shocked, a little embarrassed, about probably a month ago or so. I was talking to one of my teenage kids, and my son asked me, what's the difference between District Court and Superior Court? And it dawned on me that, wow, I'm running for judge, and my own kids who are really bright don't necessarily know the difference. So for folks who are out there wondering, District Court is, sometimes we call that the People's Court. The volume is huge. This is the low-level court in terms of our criminal justice system. So somebody comes in with a DUI, or trespassing, or they damage something that's not real expensive, or a traffic ticket, or a small civil matter. That's the kind of thing that District Court handles. There are also 4 what we call therapeutic courts or specialty courts in District Court. So there's a lot going on, thousands and thousands of cases each year. And so people need to get a feel for not only what the position does, but then they can look at the candidates to decide who would be a good fit, who would match up with the requirements of District Court. And I am that candidate. My background gives me the skill and experience to do a good job as a District Court judge.
You've been in the prosecutor's office for a couple of decades now, and been busy with a great many cases, practicing both the Superior Court as well as in the District Court. So you have a myriad of cases that you've been involved with over the years, and of course, one of the best ways to ascertain whether a person make a good judge is whether or not that individual has a lot of experience with that level of the judiciary, which you do.
Right, right. Yeah, I graduated from Gonzaga Law School in 1998, and I worked during law school. I interned with the City Public Defender's Office in municipal court, so handling misdemeanors and gross misdemeanor offenses, representing clients, which was great work in law school. I really enjoyed that. After graduation from law school, I got on with the county prosecutor's office. And so there, I started out in District Court. So I was in the trenches, doing the misdemeanors, the gross misdemeanors, prosecuting DUIs. I did 20 trials, criminal trials, while I was in District Court, learning the ropes. And my office, the Spokane County Prosecutor's Office, requires a certain level of experience and proficiency before you move up to the felony level. So once they determined I'd mastered misdemeanors, gross misdemeanors, they trusted me to take on serious felony matters. And over the course of 20 years at the prosecutor's office, I've handled essentially every type of case in the county. So juvenile cases, I've handled property crimes like stolen cars sort of thing, drug cases, dealing, possession. I've handled major crimes such as murder and robbery, handled sex crimes, the rape, child molest sort of thing, really serious matters within my office. And right now, for the last few years, I've been prosecuting chronic offenders. And our definition of that is I prosecute people who have more than 9 felony convictions on their record. And a lot of people think, well, what about 3-strike law? Why aren't these people struck out?
It's a condition that isn't present in all felony cases. It's not just because it's a felony.
Right, right. Well, people get confused on that.
Right.
What crimes are subject to 3-strike? Basically, only violent crimes fit that criteria. So, I've prosecuted folks with 30 or more felony convictions under their belt by the time they come to me. So that's what I've been doing, focusing energy on those who commit the most crime in our community. But I also have a part-time job, a side job that I've had about 25 years experience in the military. And
Reserve JAG.
Reserve JAG, that's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And I didn't start out a Reserve JAG. I enlisted back in 1988 as an active duty enlisted man, as a private 2, PB2 they called it back then. And so what I did, I jumped out of airplanes at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, part of the Airborne. We were frequently jumping with the 82nd Airborne. My job was psychological operations, and what that's about is winning the hearts and minds. That was really seriously our motto. What we did, we developed propaganda, leaflet campaigns, loudspeaker appeals, and the goal was to win the hearts and minds of the people.
Sure. You have seen the bench from the side of a prosecutor for many, many years.
Right.
But you've also seen a number of judges come and go
I
over
have.
this period of time. And by now you have, I'm sure, formulated an idea about what makes a good judge.
Mm-hmm.
What makes a good judge?
A good judge, I always thought a good judge would be the person who was the smartest lawyer in town. And that's important. A judge does have to be smart. But what I've found to be even more important in some cases is temperament and balance. So a judge has to do a tough job. The taxpayer pays a judge to make decisions that impact people's lives. So a judge has to balance a lot of factors. A judge has to be able to balance the needs of the community, holding people accountable, trying to get them on the right track not to break the law again. A judge also has a responsibility to be fair. In terms of everybody that comes before them needs to know that they're going to get a fair shake. That it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution when you're a judge. It would be easier to have that kind of attitude or that kind of approach. But to weigh factors and use that kind of experience and rationale to always do your best to have a fair outcome, that's the most important part of being a judge. And how do you get that kind of wisdom, that kind of judgment? Well, it's from working. You don't come out of law school and hit the bench. You work hard. I've worked hard for 20 years as a prosecutor. I have 17 years of experience as a defense attorney to balance out against all that prosecution time. I'm a major in the U.S. Army Reserves. I've represented many, many soldiers. In fact, next month I'm driving to Fort Lewis to represent soldiers that find themselves in a little bit of trouble. So I'm bringing that kind of balance and experience to the bench because the public expects that some people are going to need to go to jail. They did something wrong. There's a measure of accountability. There's a victim involved. And there's an expectation that there will be a punishment. The public also wants to make sure that their jails aren't being filled with people who would respond better to programs, to treatment, to finding ways of dealing with whatever issues are causing them to commit crime. And that's a tough job for a judge. And you're dealing with limited resources. So it takes a lot of experience to make the right decision. I can't claim I've always 100% made the right decision, but I've always used my judgment to try to come to the best solution I can.
And when you're talking about the economies of scale associated with the judicial portion of the county's activities and business, We have this issue with respect to the jail. It's a limited facility.
Right.
Where are you going to put these people if the jail is the inn is full, so to speak? And that very often is the case. We're told often the sheriff of the Spokane County is constantly suggesting this jail wasn't built for as many people as already in it on a regular basis. So fortunately, we have some technologies relative to incarceration or alternatives to incarceration, which have resulted in choices you can make as a judge. But you have to be pretty careful about that because the public is somewhat suspicious of those sorts of choices. This individual should be behind bars, but this individual is on home arrest or whatever. Is that a good idea, bad idea? And basically we're asking you to make that decision.
Yeah, that's right. Well, and that's a tough question. What do you do about a limited jail capacity? As a judge, you've got a couple choices. If somebody was in front of me, I could throw the book at him. I could throw the book at everybody who came before me. I could overcrowd that jail. And then what do you do?
Just out of your court alone, you could do that.
That's right. There would be enough volume. One judge can make a huge impact. That's part of why the election is so important. So judges have to have kind of a balancing act going. Now, part of it interplays with the separation of powers. So judges don't make the decision as to whether we have another jail built or a bigger jail.
Nope.
So judges have to work within the confines of our community. So we would look to the spending authority of the commissioners and the will of the taxpayer to get a feeling for how much they want to invest in jail capacity. And for a lot of people, the answer is they would rather invest in alternative programs. And not something that's a waste of public money and a free ride for somebody who is convicted of a crime. But take a Veterans Court, for example. Mm-hmm. Veterans Court is a program where people who have served in the military, if they get a criminal charge, they can come into this program. They're assigned a mentor. So, for instance, an Army person would get an Army mentor, Navy would get Navy, Marines, Air Force would get Air Force. This program, it's situated where there's incentive to progress through the ranks of this program. Military people relate to that, coming up through the ranks. So in this Veterans Court program, you start out low level, and then you graduate to the next step. You get a little more freedom, you get a little more control. At the same time, there are alternatives provided, resources for the veterans. There's a monthly meeting where folks from the VA hospital and other veterans group can come in and offer help. So they get a feeling for what's causing the crime. Is it mental health? Is it substance abuse? Is it something else? And is it something that we can address to get folks not to commit crime? That's really the best investment in our community. And for some people, you just got to put them in jail. Who's going to know the difference? That's where we rely on judgment and decades of experience to make a good judgment call.
And of course, if it's possible to reduce recidivism and to put a person back on the streets as a contributing member of society as opposed to an offender or a repeat offender, you need to have certain insights relative to the character of these individuals and to the type of punishment that ought to be meted out for certain types of offenses. Some folks get themselves in trouble but really never would again. I mean, they just plain make a mistake, a bad one as the case might be, but that doesn't mean they're a lost cause. Others, as you say, with 30 or so felonies on their record are probably irreconcilable in that respect, more or less. But the public believes very often that these folks who come back with all these offenses in their record have been the product of some judge that just wasn't smart enough to put this guy away once and for all. And you ride under that sort of pressure all the time if you're on the bench.
Right. And as a judge, you have to be prepared to take that criticism. You're making the tough call. Sometimes it works out and you're rewarded with somebody down the road who's productive. I know the Veterans Court statistics, you're talking about recidivism. For Veterans Court, we're looking at about a 15% recidivism rate.
It's been highly successful.
Yeah, versus 43% for the general population. So if you're talking about a pool of people who are, we're reducing their recidivism rate by 2/3, that's huge. So we need to invest in people, and there is a perception that there's this kind of revolving door of justice. The police arrest criminals, the criminals bond out, commit more crime. And there is some of that. So It can't be a situation where everybody is going to succeed in alternative programming. There need to be jails, there needs to be punishment, but there needs to be balance.
Add to that the fact, Patrick, we've got a projection with respect to population in Spokane County that is rather astronomical over the next 25 years. We're going to have somewhere around 15, 20, 30,000 more people here. Mm-hmm. It's huge. And of course, the percentage of offenders is down around 4 to 6 or 8% right in there. So that means we're going to have a whole lot more offenders also who are going to come before your court and other courts. And we're going to have the options relative to the penalties for crimes committed. And right now we're already at capacity, which means the public has to make some decisions in the future.
That's right. And there's no easy answer. But clearly, if we have jail capacity that was designed for our needs back in the 70s, and here it is, we're working on close to 50 years later, yeah, something's got to give. Either we have to find ways of reducing our jail population, or we need more jail space. And thankfully, as a judge, that won't be necessarily my decision.
That's not your bailiwick, but you have to deal with where to put them.
That's right.
And what kind of alternatives you are going to be able to use. And sometimes you may think an alternative is a good idea, and yet at the same time you're not 100% able to trust that this particular defendant or offender is going to profit from that.
That's right. Well, and I'll share a story with you. As a prosecutor years ago, I took a chance on somebody. They were charged with a felony. They were charged with malicious mischief. They were spray painting some tractor trailers, some trucks. And this guy and his idiot buddies got busted for it. And they did a felony level worth of damage, which back at that time was more than $250 of damage was a felony. Right. Well, we were so backlogged at that time, it was hard for us to sign up cases quicker than 2 years out. So in the 2 years that went by between when this person did the graffiti, 2 years later, he had changed his life. In fact, he paid the trucking company back before he was ever charged. So by the time the case got to me, I called the victim to see what they would like to do. And that trucking company told me that they felt like they had been made whole. This guy apologized. He paid them money years ago without even a threat of charging back then. What I did, I used my judgment, my discretion. Prosecutors, under the ethical rules, were called ministers of justice. So we have to do good, not just in terms of punishment, but also in terms of people who are charged with crimes. I went ahead and dismissed that guy's case. I ran into him years later, and he said, "Hey, you're a prosecutor, aren't you?" I said, "Yes, I am." He said, "You were my prosecutor. You may not remember me, but I remember you. I'm here on jury duty. I got my degree in computer sciences. I have a wife and I have kids. And I wouldn't have that computer degree under my belt if I had a felony on my record. So thank you." And that made an impact on me. And that's the kind of history I plan to take with me, the experience that I'm going to use being a judge. Some people, you got to punish them, but you also have to balance that against discretion and sometimes take a chance on people.
What role does compassion play on the bench?
Compassion is good. I believe as a judge you have to really believe that people are inherently good. They may make bad actions, bad choices, but people are generally good most of the time. Compassion itself is honorable, it's necessary, but it has to be tempered by a sense of realism. Reality has to strike that if I'm a judge and I'm hearing about something terrible somebody did, and the law says that there's a certain punishment for it, you know what? I'm going to follow the law. And that's not being showing a lack of compassion. That's just acknowledging that in our society we have certain consequences for certain actions.
Sure. In some ways, however, you have to be an advocate of the people relative to what the legislative branch of government does relative to the passing of certain types of laws and what have you. They look to you as the person who is meting out the justice in your court as someone who could tell us how to craft particular legislation that would be most effective, but at the same time be cost effective from the standpoint that it isn't going to waste the taxpayers' money or create situations where a person's in the system virtually perpetually and such. So you have to be a bit of an advisor as well, do you not?
Well, and Mike, you know from your time in law school, it's complicated for judges in terms of what proposals we can advocate. The judicial canons tell us that we don't want to take a position that's going to compromise our ability to be perceived as fair and impartial down the road. That doesn't mean that there aren't judicial liaison committees, advisory committees that we can form and discuss among judges and make recommendations. But judges and judicial candidates have to be very careful not to cross that line and not to come out in favor of particular policies that are really more in the field of the legislature.
Well, I'm not suggesting that you cross the line. However, people who become legislators very often have no idea what life is like in your world.
Right.
And they need to get a sense of that. And then the only place they can go is to ask folks who are in your world to tell us what it's like. You don't necessarily have to suggest, well, if you only had this or had that, life would be better. But this is a citizen's operation. It's a human enterprise, and it's subject to frailty and to error. And where you see something that would basically serve as a disservice to justice, you have an obligation to speak.
Yeah, you bet. And throughout my career, I've had an ability to reach across aisles. I'm happy to chat with defense attorneys, or if I'm in that defense role through my military, I'm happy to chat with prosecutors, see what kind of common ground we can come to reach real workable solutions. I've had the opportunity to work with victim advocate groups throughout my career. For 5 years, I was the elder crimes prosecutor, and got a real feeling for some of the needs of our elderly community, which is growing all the time.
Yes, it is.
They succumb to financial exploitation and physical abuse at alarming rates. And so I've had some experience being able to reach across and gather good ideas from people who have them.
Only got a couple of minutes left here, so let me ask you very simply. When someone comes across your name on that ballot in November, why should they choose you?
Oh, thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. In terms of electing Patrick Johnson for District Court Judge, I am the best candidate. I am the one with the balance. My 20 years of being a prosecutor, my 25 years of military service, including 17 years of defending soldiers. I have the experience behind me and the judgment to make those tough calls, and I have the support of the community. I'm lucky enough to have the support of Sheriff Knezevich. I have the support of all 12 of the Superior Court judges. I've got a lot of District Court judges on my side, supported by the county prosecutor, the county public defender, and I'm lucky enough to have a wife and kids who also support me. I know my poor wife is with me almost every event, really helping out. So I have that, and I have the training. I've been trained on the